Hello, welcome to Sophie & Co. I'm Sophie Shevardnadze. A political earthquake has hit Europe, and France's National Front is its epicenter. But how much are they hoping to achieve with their sweeping victory in the EU elections? Well, we ask the leader of the bloc. Madame Marine Le Pen is my guest today.
The build-up of discontent at the Brussels bureaucracy has broken through as EU voters swept Eurosceptic parties into the parliament. But do they have what it takes to take on the system? Should Eurocrats be bracing for change? Or is this just a passing storm?
Marine Le Pen, leader of France's Front National, welcome to the program. It's great to have you here. Alors, Madame Le Pen, Madame Le Pen, the last time we spoke, you predicted in the EU elections you'd become the -- 1 party in France, and here we are, you're #1. So what's the very first thing you're going to do?
The first thing that I will do is constitute a group in the European Parliament to be able to prevent any new advances towards European federalism, which I consider to be profoundly anti-democratic. I believe that it goes against the sovereignty of the people and the economic, social and international interest of France. So along with our allies, we will now be able to provide a new voice, different from the one which dominates in the European Union.
I will talk a little bit more about the European elections. Now, when you look at the bigger picture, right, the Eurosceptics are in a minority in the chamber, and they aren't even forming a bloc yet. So there wasn't really a global victory, so to say. Why do you think there's so much talk in the press as well of this political earthquake that's taken place?
The rules of operation of the European Parliament will oblige the left-wing and right-wing parties of the Parliament, the European People's Party and the Party of European Socialists, to come together to defend their stances against the Eurosceptics. I think it is a moment in history where it will become apparent that there is no right or left wing, that all this is a farce, that in fact they defend the same ultra-liberal vision, the same vision of a federal Europe, the same vision of pursuit of the sovereignty of the people. Maybe we have to go through this so that the people become aware that this left-right fracture that was sold to them is, truthfully speaking, political fraud. Believe me, we saw the faces of the people here in Brussels who saw us come pouring in. I think they believe that our presence will decidedly change the appearance of the European Parliament and evidently of the debates that will take place in the Parliament.
So how big is the problem of this Euro commissioners you want to get rid of? Like, has the sovereignty issue gotten so serious?
Sovereignty is the foundation of democracy. Without sovereignty, there is no democracy, because having the freedom to cast a ballot in a ballot box is one thing. But if the people you elected with your ballot have no power, because the actual power was transferred to a supernatural body, then we are no longer in a democratic process. And this is exactly what we are currently going through. I think it was in 1957 in the National Assembly, Mendes France said that there are two ways to establish totalitarianism. Either all of the powers are united together, or we transfer all the power to a supernatural body. Well, that's exactly what they did by building the European Union. They transferred the sovereignty of the people to a supernatural body that is not elected, that has no legitimacy, and that imposes its will on the people. This is true for our territorial sovereignty. We are no longer in control of our immigration policy, since with Schengen, all of our borders are open. This is true for the monetary sovereignty, since we are no longer in control of our currency. Our budgetary sovereignty, it has just been transferred to the European Union, but also our legislative sovereignty, since currently 80% of the laws which are voted in the French National Assembly are actually a transcription of European directives. I consider that France is a free country, and it should stay that way. And since we were robbed of all of our liberties, we should fight to get them back from the hands of those who stole them without our knowledge and against our will.
Just a little while back, there was talk about the new rising superpower, the European Union. Now, this election showed that the bloc is far from being a universally approved superstate. Will Europe never unite now?
Europe is not at stake. It is the European Union that is at stake. Europe exists, and it consists of nations whose wealth lies in their uniqueness, their sovereignty, their freedom, their democracy. So I'm for a Europe of nations. I wish that tomorrow we can constitute a Europe that could expand, but to countries that have preserved their sovereignty and that would work together on cooperative projects. This is what works. And this is what I want to implement. But in order to do this, we have to deconstruct this European Union.
Not very long time ago, I was talking to a member of an Alternative for Germany party, and he says that he wants to divide the Eurozone into the rich North and the poor South. Do you think this is a solution?
No, I think this is utopian. I think that we're trying to stick plasters on structures that was faulty from the beginning. As far as the euro, since it is really about the euro, they want us to make a northern eurozone and a southern eurozone. But in this case, what is the advantage for southern countries to continue to have the euro imposed on them? It would be better if they re-establish their national currency and adapt the level of their national currency to their economy to boost growth, employment and exports. Now, if Germany wants to keep a euro mark zone around their territory, that is their responsibility. If they see their interests there, they are free to do it. But we have no interest in integrating a sub-euro structure.
Now, you've also said that you want to defend French interests in the EU against Germany. What are those French interests that German policy is infringing upon?
Let things be clear. I am not a Germanophobe. This wouldn't make any sense. I cannot be mad at Germany for defending their interests. I simply find that their interests are divergent from ours. It is that simple. I criticize the French leaders for not defending France's interests and for defending Germany's interests. For example, in the case of the euro, we can see that the euro was created for and by Germany. The euro is custom-tailored, but in a way that fits only Germany and not any other country of the European Union. I want something tailored for me, and for this I want a national currency, especially since currency is a part of sovereignty. There, one currency, one country. This is the way that 95% of the countries in the world function, by the way. If tomorrow we go back to our national currencies, German marks would be overvalued compared to the euro. Our new francs would be devalued compared with the euro. We would therefore benefit, and Germany would be at a loss. Currently, Germany is profiting from the euro, since they have a currency which is structurally devalued, which gives them a considerable competitive advantage. So, this European Union has fallen under the domination of Germany, since Germany has managed to impose its views on all of the other countries, and we end up martyrs. From the point of view of the economy, of employment, of society, we have suffered a considerable loss in the last few years, and I will not continue to accept the suffering of the French people to placate Madame Merkel.
And obviously you're not a big fan of the austerity policies that, in your opinion, are ruining Europe. But what else needs to be done to combat the debt crisis?
Surely not to do this in any case, because the austerity policies that have been implemented have shown not only their injustice, but their futility, their inefficiency. The laboratory of these austerity policies is Greece. Just look at Greece. We sent the Greeks back to the Middle Ages. Their youth unemployment rate is at 60%. 30% for the rest of the workforce, a drop in unemployment compensation, a drop in salaries, a drop in civil servant bonuses. They no longer have access to appropriate health care, suicide rates have doubled, and there's been a 50% increase in the infant mortality rate. Is this progress? Is this what we have promised? This is a disgrace. It's scandalous. And moreover, it doesn't reduce deficit or debt. Greece's deficit and its debts are still increasing. This is why I say that the austerity policies are both inefficient in attaining their objectives, which is reducing deficit, but they are also profoundly unjust and almost inhumane. When we look at the fact that in some hospitals in Greece, when women come to give birth, they are given their baby only in exchange for a bill to pay for their delivery.
Who would you want to see as the head of the European Commission?
I completely don't care. They're all interchangeable. This is a legend for yuppies and for Europhiles. We tell them, look, Juncker, etc., while in reality they're all the same, completely the same. The president of the Commission as the warden of the prison, that's it. But he is there to enforce the application of the rules. So whoever the warden is, he will apply the rules inside the prison. This is exactly what the head of the Commission does. What counts is who will best apply the ultra-liberal policy, the transfer of sovereignty, the expansions they want to impose on various European populations, the signature of the transatlantic treaty with the United States, which we formally contest and which we will fight tooth and nail.
Ok, merci beaucoup. On prend une petite pause. We're going to take a short break right now. We'll be back with Marine Le Pen, leader of France's National Front, to talk about the foreign dimension of EU policies and what she thinks needs to be changed. Stay with us.
Schizophrenic Kiev. Ukraine has a new president, and he has made it clear he has no new ideas on how to resolve the country's dire problems. Poroshenko says he wants a peaceful Ukraine, but in his inaugural address, he issued a declaration of war and an ultimatum.
Right from the scene. First-rate news and eye-gripping pictures. On our reporters' Twitter and Instagram. To be in the know, follow us online.
5 seconds. And over the mic is all fueling go.
Did you know the press is the only industry specifically mentioned in the Constitution?
Stand by.
That's because a free and open press is critical to our democracy.
Track Alpha. Roll Alpha.
In fact, the single biggest threat facing our nation today is the corporate takeover of our government and our press.
Stand by, camera 1.
We've been hijacked by a handful of powerful transnational corporations that will profit by destroying what our founding fathers once built up. I'm Tom Hartman, and on this show we reveal the big picture of what's actually going on in the world. We go beyond identifying the problem.
We try to fix it.
Rational debate and a real discussion of the critical issues facing America.
Stand by on camera, go.
Ready to join the movement? Then welcome to the big picture.
Your friend posts a photo from a vacation you can't afford. Comment indifferently. Your boss repeats the same old joke. Of course you like it. Your ex-girlfriend still pens tear-jerking poetry. Keep calm. Ignore it. We post only what really matters. Add RT to your Facebook newsfeed.
I'm Marinade. Join me on Boom Bust for in-depth, impartial, and en vogue financial reporting, commentary, interviews, and much, much more. Only on Boom Bust and only on RT.
And we're back with Marine Le Pen, head of France's Front National. It's great to have you back on our show. Alors, je voudrais parler un petit peu de la situation. So I want to talk a little bit about the events in Ukraine. Now, you've called the EU an undemocratic monster, which has made things worse with its offers of partnership to Kiev. How exactly?
De quelle façon est-ce qu'ils ont aggravé tout ça?
Listen, obviously when the European Union made this partnership proposal to Ukraine, this basically meant a rupture of their relationship with Russia. It was a kind of blackmail that could only fuel the divisions of Ukraine, since we know that within the country there are citizens in the east which look towards Russia and some in the west which look towards the European Union. We were well aware of this, and fueling these divisions was obviously putting in place conditions for a danger of civil war. So the European Union started the initial fire, and since then has only aggravated the situation via threats, blackmail and sanctions, which we can clearly see do not contribute to bringing everyone to the table to find a peaceful and reasonable resolution to this conflict.
But do you think that Europe had an understanding of that division between the East and the West? Like you've said, because sometimes we get an impression that Europe had no idea what it was getting into.
By definition, it is not up to me to defend the competency of these bodies. To not know this would be tragic. Such geopolitical ignorance seems astounding to me. Nevertheless, the result is there. The European Union did not play the role that it could have played, and it contributed to aggravating the situation. What is really a shame is that countries like France no longer have a diplomatic voice, because here is a conflict in which France, if it had kept a strong political voice, a balancing voice like the one I wanted to recover, it could totally manage to overcome these difficulties. The diplomacy of the European Union is a catastrophe, and not only in Ukraine. Each time the European Union participates on the global stage, it is usually either to create a problem or to aggravate it.
And as far as the sanctions go against Russia, do you think it's a sign that the EU's foreign policy is subordinated to the US? How far do you think they will take those sanctions?
I don't know. Maybe eventually the European Union will have to face reality and come to the conclusion that it is not to its advantage to bend to America's will. In any case, that is what I hope, because these sanctions have contributed to strengthening everyone's opposing positions, which makes no sense. We were completely aware of the fact that Russia, faced with these sanctions, wouldn't say, "Oh well, if it's going to be like that, no problem, do what you want." That doesn't make any sense. The sanctions that were imposed, including those imposed on Russian deputies and even the president of the Duma, which are even more problematic, are a rupture in historical traditions on a diplomatic level. Generally, we do not sanction deputies because they are the expression of the people. So I'm under the impression that there are no more rules except maybe the ones imposed by the United States, which once again defend their own interests, but their interests are not ours.
Can Ukraine ever become an EU member, and do you think it should?
Obviously not. Obviously not. Once again, here, when the European Union promised to let Ukraine become part of it, it clearly contributed to the exacerbation of tensions within Ukraine. Ukraine will not become part of the European Union. We won't tell tales. Ukraine absolutely doesn't have the economic level to become part of the EU. And once again, it is a long way down the list. I'm opposed to any new expansion. So I say this with no judgment whatsoever. I feel friendship towards the Ukrainians, so I wouldn't invite my friends to the table of nightmares. I want to leave the European Union. I can't invite them to join. But also, the economic levels of Ukraine are so low compared to ours on a social level. So it would be once again an intra-European competition, which would be insurmountable for our country. I think their average salary is around 300 euros. You can imagine that we would face competition that will once again exacerbate economic and social tensions within the European Union. So I think it is a lie. It is a promise that we knew full well we would not keep.
Now, the G7 condemned Russia for the situation in Ukraine and vowed more sanctions. So I'm just wondering, why are Western leaders calling on Russia and on Putin to end the violence? And not the government in Kiev. I mean, they do have a newly elected president right now, so why not ask him and the government?
That's a good question, because we are at the culmination of a Cold War that has been fought against Russia by the United States, to which the European capitals have completely submitted on an international level. It's as simple as that, and a shame as well. And I would like to seize this opportunity to express my compassion and my sadness and my disgust to see these civil victims in the east of Ukraine who are dying surrounded by the general indifference of the European political world and media. It is a real scandal which is happening on our doorstep. And you're right to say that from the moment Ukraine has legitimate government, it is the government which must take responsibility. But for this, we would need to demand that the Ukrainian government dismantle and disarm the reigning militia, which would most likely embarrass a number of people.
And the elections in Ukraine were accepted and recognized by all the major powers in the West. Now, despite the civil war that's going on in the country and the fact that there was no vote in the country's rebellious East region. Now, at the same time, the elections in Syria were branded illegitimate even before they were held. Why?
Yes, but this has been happening for years. I mean, such and such decides who is on the good side and who is on the bad side. And this can change at any moment. The good guys of today will be the bad guys of tomorrow, and maybe the bad guys of today will become good tomorrow if Washington decides that it is to their advantage to make them good. It is a shame, since there is a substantial amount of mistakes that have been made at an international level under Washington's influence, especially in Syria. We were the only ones among the French political parties to oppose intervention in Syria, the first and only ones who, from the beginning, said that we were arming Islamic fundamentalists who would, if they did win, implement a reign of terror like they did in Libya. This was once again because of us. We helped them come to power. This is the American method, the international American method. They defend their interests, or they think that they're defending them, since sometimes they make serious mistakes. What is terrible is that European countries no longer have a say in things. There are no more sovereign nations in Europe that can be the voice of reason for peaceful settlement of conflicts, the voice of balance between different interests of different nations.
President Obama said the security of America's European allies is sacrosanct, promising to boost U.S. military deployment and exercises around Europe. Does Europe need this kind of support?
To defend ourselves against whom? Well, you know that we are for leaving NATO, for France leaving NATO. We have a Gaullian vision of what international politics must be like. We are for developing our relations with Russia without breaking ties with the United States. We believe that France must maintain its relations with all of the world's great nations. And we do not want to be imposed with a way of seeing things by anybody. We aspire to have the freedom to determine the quality and the level of our international relations. But to defend ourselves against whom? When we asked this question to a French politician, his answer was China. It almost makes you laugh. We can clearly see that, as a matter of fact. This is an opportunity for the United States to carry out military integration, and maybe tomorrow economic integration to extend the scope of its influence. The free trade agreement that the United States wants to sign at any price is really just another way to tie the European Union, in a quasi-definitive way, to the United States. This is once again a loss of independence, not to mention the catastrophic consequences that this free trade agreement would have for us in terms of agriculture, industry, defense, etc. So this is much more a geopolitical treaty than a purely commercial or economic treaty.
And finally, Madame Le Pen, obviously after your success in the European elections, everyone is wondering if you're going to run for president in 2017.
Oh, listen, if the followers of my movement put their trust in me, since we have an upcoming Congress in November, where I will run to be re-elected as the head of Front National, if I'm re-elected as the head of the FN, then I will obviously be a candidate for the future presidential elections, which may take place earlier than we expected, either the presidential or the legislative elections, given the extremely low level of support for the President of the Republic, François Hollande.
Really? You think the presidential elections could take place earlier than scheduled? You think Hollande could resign?
That is what François Hollande's friends say, who have raised the question to figure out how they can hold on for another 3 years while sustaining such heavy losses in all of the elections organized in the meantime, and having just a 16% popularity rating among the French population. I strongly believe in an early dissolution of the National Assembly. If the results of this early legislative election give the same results as the European election, well, the political party of the President of the Republic, which has all the power, the state, the National Assembly, the Senate, the regions, thousands of municipalities, gathered less than 14% of voices, then I don't see how the President of the Republic can continue like this. In any case, the question arises.
Madame Le Pen, thank you very much for the interview. You know, everything you've told me before in previous interviews came true, so good luck with everything.
Merci beaucoup. Merci.
We're talking to Marine Le Pen, French politician, leader of the National Front, the #1 party in France. Thank you very much. We're talking about the future of Europe. That's it for this edition of Sophie & Co. I'll see you next time.